Is everyone able to see that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. We're so excited that you're here to join us. We'll just do some quick introductions and then jump into our content. We actually have lots to cover, so we're excited to get through it. My name is Christy Huynh. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Anneke?
Everyone, I'm Anneke McEvoy, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Shelly.
And I'm Shelly Sloan, Assistant Dean of Students for Student Wellbeing, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
I skipped it. I'm the Associate Director of the Triana Flu Institute. Thank you.
That's okay.
Myself. So we're going to start with why we're here. What's our purpose? We want to make sure that everybody in the campus community can understand and has resources and is educated around using appropriate pronouns and non-gendered language. We are aware of the impact of pronoun naming and or are aware of the impact of pronoun naming and can take intentional steps to develop skills. We want to make sure everyone's aware of SUNY policy, which there's a link here, and we can actually add a link to the chat. But really, you know, we want folks to be aware of SUNY policy, but it's really the spirit of the policy that I think we already embrace. I think it's why many of you are in this room, that we want to honor folks' identities and how they want to be named. Oh, is this me too? Yep, this is still me. So I think we skipped a few slides. And in the process, I did something weird. Hang on. So our agenda today, we're going to share gender identity definitions. We're going to talk more about campus values and policies. We're going to talk about what pronouns are from almost a grammatical perspective. And we'll talk about how to be proactive with your language. And we'll give you some resources and have some time for questions. So when we're talking about an inclusive community, here are our goals. We want to continue to nurture an intentional and vital culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion across all aspects of the university, and unceasingly work toward restorative and racial justice. We want to increase retention rates of all student populations while paying close attention to identifying and understanding reasons contributing to achievement gaps. We want to continue our focus on increasing the recruitment and retention of diverse faculty, staff, and administrators, while continuing to build upon our commitment to an environment in which everyone feels welcomed, respected, and valued. And again, I think these goals speak to the spirit of the community, the inclusive community that we want to live in and invite folks into. So our discrimination policy. So gender identity or expression is a protected class in New York State. So discrimination on the basis of gender identity or expression is prohibited according to the human rights law, including employment, housing, places of public accommodation, and non-religious schools. These rights are covered under Title IX and Title VII. Thanks for that high school Latin class that my mother made me take. So again, our non-discrimination policy speaks to the kind of inclusive community that we want to be. We want to nurture members' abilities and capacities for appreciation of living and working together in a diverse learning environment. Members must not expose others to discriminatory acts of any form. Employees, students, applicants, or other members of the college community, including but not limited to, etc., vendors and whatnot, may be subjected to harassment that is prohibited by law or treated adversely based on a protected characteristic. So again, this is important because it's policy and law. Maybe not everybody's going to get on board because it's what they care about or for altruistic reasons. but we have to, and we want to. So
right, so we're going to start with the basics. So Anneke gave a good overview of why we're doing this, but I want to talk a little bit about gender identity, a little bit about the genderbread person. So if you haven't seen that, I think it's a really good visual viewpoint of what we're kind of getting at. So we're going to start with a couple slides before we get to that. We're going to talk about what gender is first. So gender is behavioral, cultural, and/or psychological ideas associated with a particular gender identity. So gender is something that we'll go to the next slide. We'll talk about gender identity next, and then we'll put it all together. So gender identity is this internal perception of one's gender and how they label themselves. And it can be based on how much they do or don't align with what their options for gender are. So gender identity, think about it in your brain and your mind. You can't tell someone's gender identity by looking at them. And I think that can be confusing for some people. Gender identity is very fluid, or can be very fluid. It's not necessarily a binary, which is the spectrum of man, woman. It can be a lot more than that. It can kind of be plotted on different parts of that. Someone could be trans, gender queer, gender fluid, gender non-conforming, which means they don't conform to your typical man, woman. A person's identity may or may not correspond to their external body or sex assigned at birth. So you might be born with a vagina, but you might not identify as female or as a woman, and that is absolutely okay. And then pronouns might or might not match an individual's gender presentation or gender expression. So just because somebody presents feminine doesn't necessarily mean that their pronoun choice is she, her. It could be they, them. It could be something different. So just because their expression or presentation is a certain way might not match what you perceive their gender to be, if that makes sense. So we're going to move to the genderbread person. And I really like the genderbread person because it helps kind of explain things in a way that makes sense to me. When I was first learning about a lot of these words, I was trying to keep it all together and figure out what was what. And this is just a really nice visual description of what this all looks like. So gender identity is what's in your brain. It's what's up in your head. The binaries are woman and man, or it could be somewhere in the middle. So somebody might identify as non-binary, gender queer, gender fluid, right? Any of those things. And people could end somewhere on that line. It doesn't necessarily have to be over on one end or over on the other end. It could be in the middle. It could be toward woman, but not all the way there. So it really could be whatever a person perceives that to be for themselves. Gender expression is really the outward look of what people would see. So some days I might choose to express more feminine and wear a dress and do my hair and put makeup on and put jewelry on. Or there might be days that I choose not to express feminine, and maybe it's more masculine or androgynous, and I choose to wear like jeans and a t-shirt or sweatpants or my husband's clothes. Societally, it's more acceptable for me to, as a straight cis woman, to express more masculine than it would be for a straight cis man to express more feminine societally. So I think we've still got a lot of work to do, but expression is just your outward portrayal of you. Then you have biological sex, which is what's between your legs. So it's male or female are the two binaries there. And then you've got intersex, which is in the middle. And actually being born intersex is as common as being a redhead. So it's a lot more common than one would think. Sometimes decisions are made in the labor and delivery room. Sometimes people might not be able to tell by looking. There's lots of different parts of that, but biological sex is what's between someone's legs and the chromosomes. And then sexual orientation is really, it's in your heart. It's who you are attracted to emotionally, spiritually, physically. And so that is either heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, pansexual. It could be any of those different things. And so I really want to encourage you to take a moment and look at this genderbread person, look at gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation, and think about where you might put yourself on any of those lines or all of those lines. You don't need to necessarily share that with anybody, but I want you to kind of think about where you might plot yourself, and to know that it doesn't necessarily have to be all on one side or the other side. It could be all over this map. So that's kind of a good way to put it out there. So I want to ask you all a question. I did say straight cis woman. Does anyone know what I mean by cis? Quiz time. So cis is cisgender. And cisgender, it means that you're comfortable with the sex you're assigned at birth. So I was born a woman. I'm comfortable being a woman. That is who I am. So the opposite of cisgender is transgender. And so it's a really good word to add to your vocabulary, because then we have cisgender and transgender instead of transgender and quote unquote normal, because everyone's normal and every way is a way to be, and there's nothing wrong with being cisgender or transgender. So it's just a good word to add to your vocabulary for that.
Michelle, do you see any questions in the chat?
Yep, I was just going to say, I see a question, pansexual. It's basically you're attracted to somebody sexually, romantically, regardless of their gender or gender identity. You're attracted to them. And that's what pansexual means.
Thank you.
I think, any questions on the genderbread person? More slide. So what are pronouns? So pronouns are basically words, linguistic tools that we use to refer to people in place of their names. So a lot of people say, oh, we don't use pronouns that often, but have you ever really stopped and thought about it? Because we use pronouns so much more than I think we realize day to day. And if you think about it and try to pay attention to pronouns or try to purposely count the amount of times you refer to somebody by pronouns, it's actually a lot more than you think. Most commonly we hear he, him, she, her, they, them, but there's also a lot of other pronouns as well, and we're going to talk about some of those in a second. Pronouns can be an integral part of their identity, who they are. They can include neopronouns. So that is a word that's created to work like a pronoun without expressing gender. So I've seen ze, zir. I've seen different words that sometimes I can't pronounce, but it doesn't matter because it's how a person wishes to be referred to. And so we're gonna talk about how to know what someone's pronouns are a little bit later. But we should always be careful to not assume someone's pronouns based on their gender expression, that outward look or that outward appearance, because you don't want to label somebody a label that they don't want or they don't wish for. And so don't ever assume, and I think we've heard that a lot, but I can't stress that enough, that when it comes to pronouns, don't assume, because it could be very wrong, and we'll talk about when that happens as well. So I think we're going to keep moving.
So as we framed the conversation as a whole, this can be a really important piece in building an inclusive community. So really naming people, you know, as they consider their name. So we're going to talk about some strategies also. This can take practice. And so really kind of putting that time and practice in. But we also wanted to give you some strategies that could be helpful. So avoiding gendered language. So we, as Shelly was saying, think about really how a lot of our language is gendered, and whether that's in formal ways that we're speaking, in letters and presentations and the way we address folks. So really thinking about how to use non-gendered language when talking about individuals, but also when talking about groups. And so using their instead of his or her is kind of an easy way to be non-gendered. Using folks or friends, y'all, using language that is more inclusive of everybody, regardless of their pronouns or whether or not you know those. And really just not using pronouns when possible. So using, changing a person's decision should be based on his or her goals. There's some alternatives to that, right? Your decision should be based on your goals, or a person's decision should be based on their goals. So there's some strategies, grammatically to be able to avoid gendered language. Also, when addressing someone, to use their name directly instead of any kind of titles that might be gendering. Also being intentional with pronouns. So some of this is about creating a space that feels inclusive. And sometimes that's us sharing our pronouns. So that allows a space for others to feel comfortable doing that. So it might just be in introductions. So if you are meeting with a student, or you're teaching a class, or you're doing a presentation, there might be opportunities for you in your introduction to share your pronouns. So as we modeled in the beginning, kind of sharing our names as well as our pronouns. Listing pronouns where your name appears. So just having that also listed. We were just, if you weren't on at the beginning, we were trying to figure out how to make our settings so that our pronouns stay on our Zoom settings. And there's a way to do that in Zoom if you go to your settings and adding your pronouns there. So it's another way to think about sharing your pronouns. You can do it in your email signature. I just added today a link in my pronouns in my email signature to our new pronoun guide, which we will talk to you about, which I'm excited about. Course syllabus, name tags, door plates. So there's just a lot of places and spaces we can think about adding our pronouns to. I think one of the things we want to be cognizant of is as we're first, getting to know folks, whether it's in a class or maybe students we're working with or new colleagues, how to provide that opportunity to share in a way that's safe for all folks. So it might be for students to have a form or something that's individualized that they have the opportunity to share that on. I know as we were creating some forms recently for a workshop that we were doing, we added a place for folks to be able to put their pronouns in if they chose. But not to do that in a super public forum without some opportunity for choice and safety. And so really kind of having an understanding of that context as well is important. Asking directly would be kind of in a private way, one-on-one, in terms of, how would you want to be addressed, but doing that privately. And this last one, I think, is, a big one. If you make a mistake, apologize, correct yourself, move on, but then make a commitment to practicing. And we'll talk about some ways to practice. And we will make mistakes. We will all make mistakes. And so I think just that acknowledgement, not over apologizing, but to, make that apology, to move on, and then to correct it. So some ways to practice, and it does really need some practice. So remember that if you do say incorrectly, to take some time to really say it correctly, in your own mind. And this could be, practicing, writing something out about the person and really using their pronouns, complimenting them in your head using their pronouns, to do it so that then it becomes natural for you to use their correct pronouns. I think just putting that time and effort in is really important, and knowing that it will take practice. And so putting that time in. Why am I going backwards? Sorry. Before we move on to resources, does anybody else have any examples of things that they've done to practice or to be intentional around the usage of pronouns that they want to share with the group? Kind of pull from the group if anybody has any good ideas.
Christy, I would just share too, like practicing apologizing. Like it's okay to say, oh, I'm sorry, I meant to do this and I'm going to do better next time. I think that that's a part of the practice too, that it's not going to be perfect every time, but we're trying, and to just be honest about it. So
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
I think one of the things I've done is trying to practice using they in as many contexts as I can, as far as when I'm speaking in general. And that seems to I've been able to help make that click a little better for that.
Yeah,
It's important. I think it's important to also point out that if you ask one person for their pronouns, you should ask all the people in the group for their pronouns. We don't want to ever single somebody out. So just having a good practice of introducing yourself in pronouns when you start, so then everyone's in part of that practice. And I think the more we practice it, the more we're going to get used to it, and the easier it will become.
So there's a lot of great resources that we have both on and off campus. So we wanted to share some of these resources. And some of this is around pronouns in particular, but some is around some broader resources in general. So we'll just kind of talk through what these resources are and what that department or organization or resource can provide. And we thought of this in a couple different ways. And some of this is in our own, work in terms of ourselves helping to create a more inclusive environment. And so for our own information, our own resource, part of this is also, we may have students or colleagues that would be supported by some of these resources. So an awareness of what these resources are in terms of making referrals, and to have an awareness of that is another, reason. So we thought about these resources in kind of a couple different ways. So I'll let Anneke start out and talk a little bit about some of the resources that the Institute has.
So really, we offer workshops. So this pronoun workshop that we've all worked on together out of the bias response team is probably a tool that the Institute will use in different spaces, faculty meetings, or student groups want us to come in and talk. So that's something we're going to utilize. We're also kind of growing our capacity to facilitate dialogue, and I think especially, Grace, you mentioned practicing apologizing. I think for some of us, this is stressful, kind of navigating, wanting to honor folks, misspeaking, not feeling like the apology means that, feeling like that's so a dialogue is just an opportunity for us to kind of talk through issues around gender, create a space where folks can talk about their gender identity and know that they'll be listened to, and that other folks can kind of listen and learn. So those are really the resources that the Institute has to offer, just helping conversations and using this resource that we're sharing with you today.
Shelly, do you want to talk about health services?
Sure. So I put all of the links in the chat. So I realized you couldn't click on them yourself. So I went through and I just added them all. But health services does have some transgender care. So if students are coming to us and are in need of that, I think we see some health services folks on here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say we were like the first college in the state to start offering this, or one of the first. So really proud that we are kind of on the cutting edge of some of this work. But the health services page has a ton of resources for students. They can do they can support students who have started hormone therapy. Correct me if I'm wrong again, any nurses who are on here. Yeah, way to go, Angie. good affirmation. And so they're very, very supportive, great staff when students are in need of any services. They also have some patient rights and responsibilities information listed, updating health records, and you can put students can put their pronouns and names that they wish to be called in the patient portal. And they have information about the preferred name policy, gender inclusive restrooms. So it's really a rich resource for students who may be feeling like, I don't know if I fit here, I don't know if they have resources here. It's a really great place to see some of the information that we have on campus for our students. So, and they even list like the Pride Alliance Counseling Services, who has a trans support group on here as well. And then they also linked Trans 101, the basics. So if you actually Google Trans 101, there should be a couple of options, but there is an Australia website that comes up, and it's got, I think, like 7 or 8 videos, and it's kind of a Trans 101 library, and it walks you through more information if you want to learn more about some of these things that we're talking about today. So some really great resources listed as well. I think that if a student has a question, I would absolutely point them to health services if they have any questions or concerns about their medical care. They're a great team and they're very in the know with all of that.
Title IX can also be a great resource for any, folks on campus. We can share, you shared the links too, and share the slides so you get all the links. Pride Alliance is a student organization that is a great community and resource for students. The Counseling Center has a trans support group that they run each semester, and so that's available to students. There's also additional training that you can do. So the gingerbread person, Shelly, offers a more extensive trainings. I'm going to let her talk about her safe zone training.
Yeah, so, and actually, I think I have, so Safe Zone talks a little bit about, in more depth, what we just talked about. It also talks about ways that we can make our campus more inclusive and accepting. It walks us through some exercises and activities. And then at the end, people have an option to take, we have magnets, stickers, and buttons that basically say this is a safe space. And it has our SUNY Oswego cupola on it. So that is something that people can take with them, and it shows students that you have had training and you can have conversations with them should you choose to do that. So it's 2 hours long, and I can schedule for your group, or I do open sessions for faculty, staff, and then also separately for students. I've realized that some faculty, staff, and students are not comfortable being in the same room, so we offer separate trainings for each group so that they can feel comfortable and open to have open conversations. So it's a great training, good way to learn more.
Yeah, I found the safe zone training very informative. So from kind of an intellectual perspective, but it's also transformative in terms of with the scenarios and the real kind of building of empathy and understanding. So if you haven't ever participated in one and are interested in, kind of going a little deeper around some of this, I highly recommend safe zone training. We also listed a couple off-campus organizations, folks in the community that are doing great work to support the LGBTQIA community. So we wanted to show you some of those resources as well. Also, if you're interested in, learning more or really kind of going directly to the policies to have an understanding, we have some links here. We're really, really excited about the pronoun guide, which was just released, moments ago, I think last week. And this is really a tool around how to use inclusive language, and a lot of what we covered today, but some resources and guides, and really kind of a standard for the campus. And so we were out of the bias prevention response team. We partnered with marketing communications and created this content. And it is new, so we all also are looking, if you have feedback. Some folks have provided us some feedback, and we'll continue to build this as a resource for the campus. So I encourage you to check that out and look at that, as well as some of the policies and guides. And I know, I think Grace put the Australian website video series in the chat. So lots of resources and lots of ways to continue to be informed and to practice this. So any questions, comments, thoughts?
I have a question.
Sure.
Who would you, so I had just this past semester, I had couple times, no, probably like 5 times now. They said that I was using their dead name. And then I tried to help them. Who do they go to? Who do I direct them to? I didn't know what a dead name was, so I had to look it up the first time. Yeah.
So
go ahead, Christy. I'll find the form and I'll add it.
Yeah, so if the issue is that a student's has changed their name legally or have changed their preferred name, but if that's not kind of registering, and I'm not sure how you're accessing their information, sometimes on a class roster, or the information that you're getting right is not their preferred name. So the preferred name change of name form and process is done through our office, the Office of the Dean of Students. So if a student wants to change their preferred name, and yes, if they're running into trouble in terms of that's coming up, they can, you can send them to our office, and it might be that it's listed somewhere that, needs updating. There's also some work being done to, now students need to come, fill out a form, there's a process. We're trying to streamline, and there's actually part of the SUNY process is that there's a system in place to, make this more easily, accessible from students, and ensure that that we, that doesn't happen. So Shelly added the student preferred name form, but there's also the preferred name for employees.
What is a dead name?
Yeah, so a dead name would be a name that someone would have maybe been given, potentially at birth, and they have changed their name, and some of that might have been, because they've, you know, are trans, and now they have, you know, their name is now a chosen name. And so it would be like equivalent to using, you know, mispronouncing someone in terms of using a name that they no longer. And so what complicates it is that sometimes in our systems, that information is still there. And so again, I think probably using some of the same strategies in terms of apologizing, being sure to use their name. And then sometimes it might just be making sure, you know, that's noted kind of in our documents and in our information, so that we ensure that we use their correct name.
Okay, thanks.
For the name change form for students, if it's just a preferred name, a name that they wish to go by, it's not a legal name, they can still change that on campus and have a new ID, but their given name would be, or their legal name would be on the back of their student ID. So they would issue that and they'd be able to change their email and things like that. But because it's considered a legal document, it still has to include the given name. So, but I always use me as an example. I was born Michelle and nobody knows me as Michelle, so I'm Shelly. So I could fill out this preferred name form for employees. It goes to HR, they could do that, and then I would get a new ID that said Shelly Sloan on the front and on the back. There are too many of us, Michelle. So on the back it would say Michelle Sloan, but on the front it would say Shelly. So it works that way too. So it's not just anybody can fill this out. It doesn't have to be like a transgender or anything like that. Different pronoun type thing. Anybody could do that if they wanted to.
Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you all. Thank you all for your commitment to this and for attending.
Thank you. That was very nice session.
Thank you.
Okay.